Yeah, I don't know.
Going live now.
Okay, so this is GitOps. I think it's GitOps panel. So we're going to talk about discuss fight on the topic everything about GitOps. I have quite a few great people over here. Maybe everybody can introduce themselves, starting with if I butcher your names, that's not intentional. Yishai, was it
Yep,
close?
that's the name.
There you go. Quick
Hi,
introduction.
great being here. Thanks, Victor. So my name is Ishai Berry. I'm the CTO for LinRB. We are a startup that's focused on helping developers and dev teams improve. Um, I am based in Tel Aviv. Basically, half of our company is in Tel Aviv. The other half is mostly great being here.
Okay, who's next? Lukasz.
Hi everyone, my name is Łukasz Piątkowski. I work as a platform architect for a company called Giant Swarm, and currently, for quite some time already, me and my team, we are working on improving developers' experience mainly by doing GitOps.
You also forgot to say making the best party in KubeCons.
Hey.
I think that this goes without saying, right? If you've been to Barcelona or you've been now to Valencia, well, you know that. If you haven't, next time you have to fix that.
Okay. Johannes, I think.
Yeah, exactly right. I'm Johannes Nicolai, working for PlanetScale as a solutions engineer. Throughout my career, I did nothing else but branching and merging. I started at CollabNet with Subversion, then moved on to GitHub, where I spent 6 years on implementing stuff like pull requests, and now it's PlanetScale, which is based on an open source CNCF project called Vitesse, that now has, guess what, branching and merging for databases as well.
Okay. Let's go then. Let's start with the first one. The most obvious one, where we're going to either include many different tools or exclude majority of them. What is GitOps? Depending on where you come from, you're going to have a different definition. I want to hear.
Okay, so let me kick this one off. For us, GitOps is a process actually of managing your configuration and preferably everything else, including infrastructure, for example, by having a single version source of truth that describes how this should look like. So you keep everything in a declarative state in a Git repository. This is your description of reality, your intended state. There are some tools that enforce this state and apply your state to your real infrastructure, your real configuration, and they also make sure that this is kept in sync automatically.
And
Yeah.
I think that the sync is there the key, right? Because if I look at the open GitOps manifest, there are 4 rules. That's why I'm starting this, and I know that some people disagree with those. It must be declarative. It must be version immutable, easy. It must be pooled. It must be continuously reconciled.
Yeah, definitely the continuous reconciliation is important because it's not like apply once and then forget about it and allow for drift and allow for snowflakes and all of that. Exactly. The point of this is that really your Git repository is your source of truth. If something is in the repository, it is applied on your infrastructure. If it's not, it's not. That's the important property, that this sync really is, let's say, real time or close to real time for you.
Yeah, I think for me the two key parts and how they translate to developer experience at the end is having the single source of truth, one place to consult. This is at least something that says what should be, and I don't have to dig or look into multiple places. There is only one possible truth, and then at least some automated way to make that truth happen. I think like detecting drift or automatically fixing drift are implementations of this characteristic. I can choose to maybe only alert me about drift, but let me decide if I want to correct it. But the fact that I have automated ways, one click or zero click in the case of automation, that says I can now apply or create an instance of this state running in the wild. And I would maybe also add to the definition the ability to translate from one definition to multiple instances, multiple live instances. Make like the ability to make a copy of the production state that is not necessarily decided in advance. Um, to me, is a powerful part of GitOps.
Because depending on how we define it, one can argue that if you put stuff in Git and you, like 15 years ago, and you use Jenkins to trigger a build every time you change something in Git, you would get GitOps.
I
But
think
then there
that's
is
still okay, right? I mean, when you said it, did you really say at the beginning it has to be pull-based, or did I mishear?
Yeah, so according to GitOps principles, and I'm now reading from opengitops.dev, which is supposed to be a collective effort of quite a few companies and players. Declarative, versioned and immutable. So declarative, cool, YAML, HCL, anything. Versioned and immutable, that's Git. Pulled automatically, that's a tricky one. And continuously reconciled. And I think that number 3 and 4 actually make it different between using pipelines, let's say, whichever pipeline you'll be using, triggered as a webhook. They would only fulfill the first 2 of those 4, assuming that we agree that open GitOps is a thing, right?
It's a thing, but I guess it's a matter of how you define pull-based, right? I mean, any CI/CD in a sense is, well, it can be triggered. It's often triggered, but at the end of the day, it's pulling the source code in and then doing changes based on logic. Whether this is a CI/CD system or a sophisticated GitOps operator, all of those will at the end call something like, for instance, kubectl, right? And so,
Yeah.
so at the last step is push based, anyways. If you're not modifying all of your infrastructure itself to pull, right? So somewhere the push happens, and I would argue that CI/CD or at least intelligent CI/CD can be part of a GitOps solution.
But
I think that
let's say-
this like pull versus push based is to me kind of implementation detail. I don't really care. What I care about is that this is applied. I have my sources in Git and they are applied. Is this like pulled? Is this pushed? I don't care as long as this is happening more or less real time or in a short
I think the main difference
period of
between
time.
classic CI/CD and what you're talking about here is not in the tooling, but in CI/CD. Typically, people use that as a partial way to push changes somewhere. In GitOps, you're trying to say, this tells me everything, right? It includes the infrastructure and all the state I need. The CI/CD may be able to build one service and deploy it, but it doesn't always try to say, I know everything. I think to me, that's the main distinction and it's about how you use it. It's not about what the tool does. So you can do CI/CD to implement GitOps, but if you only have a build job that updates one service,
Yeah.
and it doesn't know about everything else, or it's not part of a full declaration, then you're not fully in GitOps land.
And still
That's
with
true.
this like pipeline approach, the problem is that someone can always if this sync goes only one way, from your repository through a pipeline to your infrastructure, someone can always log into the infrastructure, do manual changes, and never apply them back in the repository. And that way, you only have an impression of GitOps. Like you think that what you have in your repo is reality, but it's not anymore.
I was about to ask that precise question. Thank you, because kind of that was the last one, continuously reconciled. Because if I created X by pushing it to Git, and I delete X manually, then should the process recreate X or no? And if it should, how will it do that if I'm not pushing any changes to Git?
Well, yeah, I guess if you're pushing often enough, right, and you're using something like Terraform as part of your GitOps strategy, which is declarative, then it would fix those issues as part of the ICD. I mean, you can also set ICD as a cron job running every 5 minutes to just do Terraform apply.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, cron job like every 3 minutes, that would fix the problem.
Yeah, I think being able to know that your Git state is reflected in reality is a very important characteristic. And if you choose not to do that, then at least you want to know about the drift all the time. So someone has to do at least the comparison and keep that state up to date. So at every minute I can see what's the drift. If I'm not fully into removing the drift automatically, at least that the information about the drift should be near real time.
Yeah, exactly. I was working with a system like that. It was built exactly like this. Long time ago, we just had a pipeline, and this pipeline went just one direction, from repo to the infrastructure. That was it. But we implemented additional tool. It was not sophisticated enough to really remove what was removed or add what was added, but at least it was doing a full diff of the state and was reporting what the current drift is. And with that information, we're at least able to keep this thing with a semi-automated effort, but still we knew what the difference between intent and reality is.
Yeah,
sure.
So
I sometimes wonder would be very interested on your opinion on that, whether the state, which is part of the Git repository, whether that should be human readable or not. First, the state itself, and then also how the intended state and the actual state and how they differ. Is it okay to have some binary blobs that can only be used by a certain tool, or does it have to be human readable?
You need to define human, I think.
Well,
is it a developer
by a human who knows the realm, right? In the
okay. So you're asking about binary versus the YAML, for example?
For instance, yeah.
So who creates? Who defines the state?
Is human, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The consumer of drift information is human.
If I have a tool that allows me to understand what's there, I'm good. But I, as a human, want to understand the full state of the repository because this is my source of truth. How can I not understand what is in my source of truth? How my deployment should look like?
Makes sense.
The question is, in my head, the question is really, if it's humans who define the desired state, then it needs to be humanly readable, right?
Yes.
Because there is cooperation between teams, pull requests or if we review, blah,
exactly.
blah, blah. Now, if it's machines, actually, that would be a separate question, but if it's machines changing the desired state, then I'm not sure I need Git. Kind of like if I'm not going to collaborate with my colleagues, if I'm not going to be involved myself, then maybe Git would be an overhead in that case. And a good example would be, let's say that you're doing canary deployments, right? And whatever you're using, maybe Flagger or Argo rollouts or whatever you're using, is going to be changing the weights of the one release and another. It will be actually changing things periodically depending on the metrics and stuff like that. That's not really entering into Git. That's not necessarily even that human readable or accessible. And it's not in Git, right?
Yeah, I think Git serves both for the collaboration piece, that's obvious. It also serves as an audit history, right? Mm-hmm. This was the state as deployed yesterday or 3 months ago. So as long as you care about the history, you want to be able to for debugging, for root cause analysis, or for anything else, to say this was the state, then you need the Git to basically reflect that. It's much cheaper and nicer than taking a snapshot of the running state and saving that.
Yeah.
And if you have the diff capability, they're equivalent. So Git gives you that for free.
And then you can cherry pick stuff like that.
We cannot really say for what is defined in Git as this is the state. We do not know whether that's the state. We know that that's the intention. We do not know whether that's the state.
Yeah,
Kind of
I'm
like the only
assuming running
state
automated.
valid is actually the system itself, right? That's the only ultimate state or
Right,
actual
right.
state, right?
So if
Target
your
state.
if your process for sync is robust, then Git is a good proxy for that. Or maybe you're saving drift information periodically, and that plus Git is the state.
Exactly. Like, for example, what you mentioned, progressive delivery, right? I'm setting up like my intent. By my intent is actually do a canary release. And if this canary release is successful, capture this change and put it in the GitOps repository for me. I don't have to like rely on humans only to do changes there. My intent might be to do automated stuff. And the endpoint is just that if this whole process, like what you said, this is my intent, the reality might be slightly different because there might be a process that leads to this reconciliation, right? And this progress might take some time, like again, canary deployment. But after all, if my intent was to update something, some version, some release, I want to see this in the Git repository as well when the process is done, right?
Yeah. So, but we are potentially missing actually the piece that you're just describing, or at least to my knowledge, right? There are quite a few tools that I know that will take your desired state, target state from Git and make sure that it is applied to the real state, the actual state. But the changes happening directly in the actual state are hardly ever reflected in Git, right? If you set autoscaler, you will never know from Git how many nodes you have, right?
Yeah, that's a debate whether it should be whether Git itself should be bidirectional or unidirectional. I was on a conference where this was heavily debated, and most folks actually went for unidirectional. So they basically assume that whatever is in Git should override what is in the other system, and because otherwise it's all kind of implying I'm changing something. If somebody was manually changing the target system, and that change would then be reflected in Git, that that it was okay to change it there. That was kind of the rationale.
Yeah, but if you have cluster autoscaler, let's say Kubernetes cluster autoscaler, you never even specify the number of nodes.
So you're talking about additional information. One would then need to maybe something like Git annotations for existing objects, right? Like metadata in Git, like, to say this is what the system tells me on top of what I want, but it's not anything that would stay. If I did another commit on top of it, it could be wiped out. Right?
I think it's also a case where the actual state is wider and deeper than what we see in Git, right? The number of nodes actually running right now is a more delicate resolution than what I specify in Git. I specify the autoscaling parameters. The reality of autoscaling is not I don't have maybe an interest to have that in Git. The state also changes with the data, right? The data itself is a key part of my state, and it's never in Git.
For me, the rule of thumb is that if my infrastructure disappears, what I have in Git should be enough to recreate it. Again, I don't care how many nodes I have. This can change. I don't have to know, right? But the idea of having an auto-scaling group of nodes has to be in the repository so that when I try to recover, when I try to apply, it is still there.
Let me try to challenge that. I like playing devil's advocate. Imagine a situation that you have release number 1 of your application in your cluster. You do canary release. It starts kind of progressing towards release 2. It doesn't fulfill whichever metrics thresholds you set. It rolls back to release 1. And in that moment, your system crashes. And you recreate it from Git. You would be effectively having release number 2 in Git. And it would never go back to number 1 because it's the first release from the perspective of canary deployments.
I think it still depends. I mean, for me, this is like, I really like this discussion, uni versus bi-directional Git, right? Because the simple scenario is really unidirectional to me. And that's like plain and simple, let's say. But then I also expect some dose of automation on top of that. And for me, this is already like creating a different layer on top of this unidirectional basic idea of Git. And in my opinion, the scenario that you described doesn't have to be real. I mean, it can work quite in a different way. For example, the progressive rollout creates a branch, and this change is only available in a branch. There's a pull request. Whether or not the progressive delivery is successful or not is one of the tests that is required for merging the PR. If it fails, this never gets to the main branch that gets deployed to the infrastructure. So quite contrary, if I have a crash at this moment, the PR is in progress, tested, read, whatever. This is never applied to my main branch, and I recover still with version 1. But this piece of automation is for me like already a layer on top of Git, and possibilities there are really huge, and there are not that many solutions yet that can effectively do that for you.
Exactly. Because going back to the argument of unidirectional, bidirectional, right? If you're using pipelines to automate, forget about GitOps for a second, right? If you're using pipelines to automate, let's say, building testing and what's not, and in one moment, those pipelines will be create a new release and update the repository, the manifest of that application repository, and then GitOps will kick over and do the synchronization, right? That's bidirectional. Now, when I think about it, right? It's not me actually, it's machines changing the state in Git.
Or if you're releasing not with a version number but with a SHA-1 as version number, you don't have additional commits. Like that was the problem with the Maven release plugin, that you had 4 commits after you released just to reflect what was changed after you created that release. But I thought with this continuous deployment idea, the idea was really don't assume any versions outside what is in Git and use the SHAs.
Yeah, but the question is, who is changing the version in Git? A person?
Well, whenever you create a new commit, it has a SHA, and that's the version of your application.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the desired state changed not by me, but by
I
a
get
machine.
what you but you would know that already when you push. At least as a human, you would see it before it becomes reality because it's part of your local workspace.
True.
Yeah, it feels like information from the running state that feeds back into the repo as a, either a PR process to successfully test PR through releasing it and then signaling that this is okay now, this needs to be pushed to main. These all need to live as reviewable processes, not direct commits to, like, changes to the Git desired state is a decision.
Yeah.
And you may have flows that update that through automation, but that's because you've decided, not because something ran.
Yeah, otherwise you also get this infinite update loop, right? Where any change in the autoscaler would trigger yet another one, right? And then you never stops.
That sounds like a good get rich quick scheme.
Yeah,
The cloud
you're
operators.
paying by commit. What I found interesting is, when we are talking about GitOps, it's mostly about stateless stuff, right? In the moment databases get in or anything with state, it gets even more tricky. Anybody with experience on resources that have state in GitOps?
I think this is about, like, not just the databases, but data at large. Real applications, the state, like the definition in Git is not enough to be running effectively. You need the right kind of data in the right place. At least some of the configuration is probably in data. So you're talking about fixtures and about ensuring that the data is in the right situation. You need to maybe migrate the data or the database to match a specific version.
Mm-hmm.
All that gets very hairy very quickly.
Yeah, because I was thinking about Lukas' comment that he wants to basically reestablish a complete environment by just saying this is the Git repo, and that would imply that you also pointed to, well, the schema and how it should look like in all the data sources. I guess it can be part of GitOps, right? I just wonder how many people include that as part of the GitOps processes already.
Sure, but you like, I agree, but you took this in a really wide context, right? I can't imagine having like a few petabytes of database snapshot in a Git, right? That probably doesn't
You
make
could have a
sense.
pointer to it, right?
But even an empty functioning system, you would need data fixtures to see,
When-
right? Most
When you
most
think
applications
about it,
would not
there's
work
not much. There's not much different than container images, right? We do not. I mean, we do not keep container images in Git. We keep a pointer to a registry that contains the image, and that sounds very similar to keeping a pointer to backup.
I think so, yes.
And basically, those registries are like a very simple Git, right? There's versioning, there's
Yeah.
history. You may not care about the diffs as much, but it's a repo.
There's even a CNCF project called Vitesse, where you can point to the schema in your database, how it should look like, and depending on where you are currently, it will just adjust until it's there again. Right, so
GitOps for database schemas.
Exactly, right, because at the moment most schema changes are delta-based, iterative, and that doesn't play well with GitOps, right? Especially if you wanted to go back to a certain state, then you need declarative SQL, and that's this Vitesse CNCF project. It works with MySQL and Kubernetes.
My major conflict that I have in my head, I have very clear that whatever I as a person write should be stored in Git. I have absolutely no doubt about that, with or without GitOps. Kind of like, I cannot imagine why not. My doubt that I honestly don't have a solution or answer to that is that really is GitOps about having my personal intentions stored in Git, or is it the desired state, or is it the actual state? Kind of like, what is it that I have in Git? Because what we spoke before, kind of like, if it's the desired state, then actually desired state is a combination of what I say plus what machines say that the desired state should be. I'm getting philosophical now, but hey, pipeline just generated the release with a random number, SHA, whatever you want, kind of. It's not me making that decision. I mean, or not fully, right? Canary releases rolled back again. It's not my decision.
It's probably
it's
not bitwise the same, right? You could have the same GitOps commit and then run it twice, and depending on the timestamps, you get different results, at least if you compare it bit by bit.
Yeah, I think that like all these assumptions are really cool, but they are also kind of a perfect world scenario. And in reality, you have to take a compromise at some point. Exactly what we were discussing a while ago here, that I'd like to be Git, my perfect recovery solution, like have everything in Git. My world is gone, and I can recreate it by just pointing some GitOps operator to my Git repository, and everything comes back. But that's unrealistic, right? Even the assumption that everything, literally everything that you keep in Git repository is declarative, even that is a stretch sometimes. And that shows up when you really want to go back in history, you want to revert a change, or you really want to use Git for recovery. And then it turns out, oh, no, there was a piece of state that I actually missed. This piece is gone. This piece was never in Git. What to do now, right? But I think that it's still unrealistic to really version our whole world and put it into Git commit by commit. And we have to draw this line somewhere.
I think that, to me, the answer to the philosophical questions is going back to developer experience. This whole thing is about solving specific pains and improving the experience of developers that are maintaining and improving and changing code and systems. So whatever helps is more important than the pure definition. If this is useful for me and it helps me with, dedicate more time to coding new features and less time to worrying about reconstructing or bad state somewhere, then yes, it's worth doing, or it's worth an effort, and maybe even worth calling it a name.
Yeah, exactly. Customers are
Like Lucas
asking,
said,
how can I do that,
it's
right?
never
And
perfect.
not, is it a pure Git? Is it the classic way? Is it the official way to do Git? No, they want to solve a problem, right?
Mm-hmm. And if you take any physical control loops, like a thermostat, you also have a desired state, and then the target state will never be 28.0 centigrades. It will always deviate a bit, and it's not fully constant. So so that you're basically edging around a certain desired state, but never 100% have that one, is probably also just the truth for anything which creates something physically. And at the end of the day, anything running in the cloud is also just bits and physics, right?
So here's a question then. GitOps is without a doubt becoming is very popular. It exploded, right? There is no conference without a panel about GitOps, right? Including this one. Why aren't the tools adopting GitOps? A simple example, like if you use, let's say that you're a person who you use Visual Studio Code to generate something and push to Git. That's a user interface, right? Isn't Lens user interface just as much? Shouldn't if it provides benefits, shouldn't user interfaces actually use Git as storage in a way?
That's a good one. I think that part of the problem why it's not that popular yet is that it's also not that mature yet, and like tools will come, I hope. Part of it is also that like GitOps seems kind of solved from the basic tools and basic principles perspective, but still some organizational stuff or best practices, they are still missing. Like this is still a set of bricks. Like you need to figure out what is your best way to use those bricks. What do you want to build from them? And this knowledge is still like people are trying very different approaches. Like for example, how to keep your environments, how to structure your Git repository between production and testing, or maybe between different versions. Is it multi-directory? Is it multi-branch? What's the best approach? What will work for me? And I think that we have to somehow use it more to come up with those best practices, to figure out what really works, what is understandable also for the teams, and only then can come automation and tools that, yeah, now we know what the tool should do, right? How to create the tool. So for me, it all feels a little bit fresh.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reasons why GitOps can be successful and is picking up is obviously the clouds and containers. There's a lot of technology that is needed to be able to feel confident about something that automatically builds everything for me, or that it's feasible and both on a cost and time manner to build something on the fly with a like after a commit. We're all old enough to remember when you had to ship servers, right? It took weeks to create infrastructure and that was the good case. So this is all, in retrospect, this is pretty new. These capabilities of saying, okay, scrap everything and build everything again. That's not very old, and it takes time to percolate to all the places you would want to or probably use it. So I think it still needs more time.
Victor, I got a message. No, it doesn't matter. So Okay. That's you, Johannes. Okay, cool. I don't know how to do it. If you know,
So we have a poll, which is
I found it.
which I could publish if you agree.
Yeah.
With it.
Okay. I'm just clicking it. Create. No. Yeah. Publish it if
Publish.
you have the rights. Yeah.
Let's do so. So it's basically just asking our audience whether they are already using any GitOps processes in production, fully, mostly in small pockets, evaluating, or it's just not any priority right now. Because I have a theory, but I won't mention it. I guess we have to keep on discussing and see whether folks are participating.
I have a theory that if you ask a question on conference, you're getting answers from people closer to the edge than the average industry.
Can imagine. Yeah. Let's give it a couple of more minutes, right?
Sure.
Before we publish.
But while waiting for that, what's the next kind of for GitOps? Is it iterations on the same thing? Is it some bigger change? Is it Git? Should it be Git? Okay, let me throw a bomb over there. Is the Git ideal thing for storage for the desired state for GitOps?
Again, for me, Git is just implementation. Like, I don't care. As long as I get my features, as long as I can compare changes, as long as this is versionable, I don't care. Name it anything you want.
Yeah.
I'm happy it's Git because I know Git from developer's point of view, so I'm happy to work with it. But make it whatever you want, okay? And as for this question, like what comes next, I think that I actually at least partially answered that. For me, it is what comes on top of Git, because right now we have some GitOps conflicts, like GitOps conflicts with, for example, automated releases, progressive delivery, stuff that we already mentioned here, right? I don't want that to clash with my GitOps approach. I want that to cooperate with my GitOps approach. Going even a step further, like right now, like I'm entirely in the Kubernetes environment. So for me, GitOps is like yet another hundreds of YAMLs, right? YAMLs everywhere. But at some point, I don't really want to care if it's a YAML or another YAML. I would like to say, this is my app. I want to deploy this app on these clusters in my infrastructure. I want to be able to tell the difference from one rollout to another. I want to be able to get other people's opinion on it. I want to be able to do automated patch releases for my application. Does it have to be stored as YAML? No, I don't care. It would be even better if that could be something more understandable, more human readable, right? So I believe that like this whole movement will take us more into more automation, more processes, and I believe like this dual way of syncing GitOps, that machines will push to our repositories more and more because we ask them to automate processes we don't want to do manually in our GitOps repositories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree that YAML is just an implementation detail, right? The engine that takes my state and applies it or does a diff, like that is really a plugin. And GitOps to me is a broader name for anything that looks like that. I would
Should be
venture
versioned. Yeah.
the next, or I don't know if it's the next, one of the things in the future for GitOps is to apply that to things that are not code-based services. So think of some business processes where the desired state and definition of the process is shortened version in Git or similar, and then applied to something that is not even code-based.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is the playbook where your sales reps or your customer support reps read from, and it's
Culture
the
as code.
system they use automatically pulls the right version because someone committed a change somewhere.
Those answers are very interesting to me. The reason why I brought Open GitOps at the very beginning is because this is somehow conflicting with what you're answering right now. And I always felt that those four that I mentioned before from Open GitOps are extremely narrow, as if they're actually reflecting the current implementation of specific two tools. That's why I brought it up, kind of like, hey, declarative, does it have to be declarative? I mean, is Helm declarative? I don't even think that Helm is Helm is not even declarative, kind of, if you include the templates and what's not. So I have a feeling that we are very kind of with the current official statement, this is GitOps, as if we are narrowing it, almost preventing the progress. Kind of, yeah, does it have to be pooled that I mentioned before? Does it have to be declarative? Is that really the essence of it or something else?
I think declarative is quite important if you wanted to reestablish that state. But that it's Git based, well, be also subversion ops, right? But
is Helm declarative?
Partially. I guess anything is.
The 100% declarative is another like a philosophical question.
Yeah.
But I think if you dig under the requirement to be declarative, this is about being able to compare states. Can I compare that and find the drift and fix it? Typically, you need to be declarative or close to declarative to be able to do that. But the real desire is not the declaration, it's the ability to effectively either reapply or the identified drift.
Idempotent, redeployable. Yeah.
That is the core of to me, the declarativity requirement.
True.
And I loved your idea about your culture ops part, like the sales part. But what I still don't get there is, I get it for data, for instance, in database, but for this part, like what would be the desired state then be when it comes to sales? Do you have an example?
So sales may be a bit soft, but desired state to me is the definition of a process. This is the level of, I don't know, discount a salesperson can give on a call, or this is the script that you want your person to go through on a discovery call. I'm taking some extreme examples, but in many businesses don't define this, but when they do, or when you find pockets that you want to declare how a process should work, who approves what to get to some other state.
Gotcha.
Not all these things are implemented as code, but they are declarations. And some businesses, GitLab is an example, but there are others that are trying to be very both transparent and declarative in how we do business. And they're versioning those.
Yeah.
Things. So
yeah.
The deployment part is still hard, but I think that is there are areas there that are really going to enjoy leverage GitOps kind of thinking.
I've been working for GitHub for a long time, and we had those processes also in Markdown and versioned. But I like the idea of like your pricing example. You could theoretically or also practically push that into Salesforce for deal desks to decide up to whether an individual rep could give a quote or something.
Right. Or into Stripe or into your, like what we're basically saying is that application logic is also something that can leverage GitOps.
Yeah, could be any business application. That's great point.
Yeah, I can imagine this for sales, like you said, like salespeople, they usually have like first contact, right, customers, then the talks, they either progress and the customer becomes like more like, there's bigger likelihood of engaging with this customer, or there's not. I can imagine this being a Git process where you change a state of some entity, and you can additionally ask your colleagues for a review. Do you agree that like we have progressed enough with this potential customer? Yes. Review, accept, commit, right? New state.
Yeah. Or new outreach messages. If you're doing a campaign after a conference, what should be the templates that you review them and then they're getting emailed out?
Yes. So marketing automation. I think both the collaborative process for making the changes, approving them. Think about testing, like A/B testing, and then accepting the change based on performance. This is a canary release, right? I have two email templates. They're both, I don't know, maybe implemented as branches.
Yeah.
They get deployed as a canary. Metrics about click-throughs and whatever responses feed the decision of whether this template becomes the real one. UI changes, everything could, like a lot of application logic can enjoy this process.
Oh, we have 3 seconds.
Publish the
Majority said
results.
evaluating your
Yeah.
in your poll results.
Yeah.
And with that, we are
50%.
5 seconds over time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We need to
Bye.
do this
This was
again.
great.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye. It was a pleasure.
We're out now. No,
We're doing the
maybe not.
classic mic drop now.
I don't know. I don't know whether this session ended or not.
Right.
Maybe we're still live. Who knows?
Yeah, we're still live. It looks like.
I have no idea.
Yeah. We shouldn't close it automatically. Yeah. Some of us have talks coming up today and tomorrow, so I encourage you all to look them up.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.
Hit me up if you want to talk about the interview.
Bye.
Thank you, and hopefully see you again.
Yeah.